beautiful people. Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much for your patience. We have a special guest here and we were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we think we figured it out. And so here we are. I just want to say hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jennifer Diamond, and I'm a certified plant-based nutrition coach living a whole food, plant-exclusive, SOFAs-free, and gluten-free lifestyle for health and well-being. And living this way literally gave me my life back. And I believe it can help you too. Woo! So today we have a great topic that impacts so many of us, especially as we get older, our bone health. Osteoporosis, as you know, I am combating, and osteopenia are often called the silent conditions because you can't feel your bones getting weaker. But the good news is there's so much you can do to support and strengthen them. So I am so excited to welcome back my special guest, Eileen Kopsaftis, who has decades of experience helping people improve mobility and strength and overall wellness. Together, we're going to uncover the truth about bone density and health so you can age well with strong, healthy bones because, I mean, we all deserve to live stronger, healthier lives. So I also want to say thank you so much, everyone, for your patience while we get this together. And I want to say hello to Eileen and welcome back.
Yes, hello, Jennifer, and your audience is wonderfully patient. I had my tech person install a new camera on my desktop, and for some reason it was not playing nice with your particular program here. And so I went to use my older camera, but for some reason now that seems to not be installed on my desktop, even though I didn't uninstall it. So I am now on my laptop, and we figured this out, so it's all good. Yes, thank you,
Yes.
everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so last time you were on the show, you shared an amazing presentation all about the 5 myths of joint pain. So if you're watching right now and you missed that one, please make sure to go and onto my YouTube and watch it, as it has a wealth of information. And I believe today won't disappoint as well. So I'm also wondering, in case people are new, maybe you could take just a couple minutes and share a little bit about you, more than what I did.
Sure. So I have been doing this for decades. So it does show that I'm getting up there in years, but I'm aging really stinking well, and I plan on being happy about it till I'm at least 112, if not older. And I run some programs where I help people to do the same thing. I have an online Have Lifelong Wellbeing Academy where people who are, I call them my students, but they're mostly in their 50s, 60s, 70s, some in their 80s, who have learned how to apply specific strategies and understanding of things so that they will maintain their independence as long as they're above ground and have a quality life, which we all want. And then I also run a Move Without Pain private club program, which is aimed at people who can learn how to move in specific ways that addresses the common culprits behind pain. So I love what I do. I've been doing it a long time now, and I'm just really happy to be here and hope this information helps a lot of people.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much. You know, we had some out of town friends visiting yesterday, and we were all together, and I was sharing about how amazing your programs are, and you offer so many, not only, you know, things like this. I know you have a Friday, like a free Friday thing where you offer some kind of tip for the week, and I know that you offer free programs every once in a while, and then you also have your other programs that are paid memberships, which I, you know, often think, gosh, one of these days I'm gonna maybe sign up. You know, I just have to have the time, but I know and believe that everything that you do and share is so beneficial and so different than what you get when you go to like a regular, you know, medical doctor or even a regular physical therapist. And so that's why I'm so excited to have you share anytime you want to share.
Yes, yes. And to expand on that just briefly, I'm very well known for saying this is not mainstream knowledge, but it should be. it's very sad that a lot of what I share that is based on science proven, it's science backed evidence. It's for some reason, I guess it just doesn't sell headlines, and so it's very sad. And yeah, I do have a lot of free stuff. I have my own YouTube channel where there's a lot of movement education on there. I do my Friday value video that goes out every week to subscribers. And I also have my monthly newsletter that I've been doing now for almost, actually, it'll be 11 years next month. So yeah, I have a lot of, and I have a free membership in the private club for pain for people who, want to get their feet wet and kind of see, will this work for me before they invest their hard-earned resources. So yeah, I would do everything I do for free if I didn't want to live out of my car. So because I love what I do. Yes.
I hear what you're saying, and I do know I have some friends, one in particular that I'm thinking of, that has also done some one-on-one training with you. And are you still doing that for people?
Yes, I do private consulting. I have very limited time for that, but I do, yes, because sometimes people need that added where I observe them, I figure out, okay, what's not working right here, what's not working right there. We do some different movement training and we see right away, did that impact what we found? And if it did, we know that's the right homework for them. So they're not chasing their tail. So it can be very helpful to people, yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, everybody in the chat, I just want to say thank you for being here and your patience. I want to say hi to Jill and Patsy and Mona and everyone else is here. I usually have access to scroll on our chat and I don't today. So I will be asking Todd for help if we need it. But please feel free to ask questions, make comments in the chat, and we will definitely get to them as soon as we can. And I believe that we are ready when you are, Eileen. We have your presentation and slide, and all you could just, once we get it up here, you just let us know when you want us to change slides.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. That happened at a conference once where the clicker was not working and they didn't have a new battery. And so the owner of the host of the conference ended up sitting there and moving my slides forward for me, which was very, very nice. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So
Are we seeing
yes.
this now, or are we seeing us? Oh, he already switched. He already switched off.
Yes, I can see the slide, so I'm assuming that's what everyone else is seeing. So
Yes,
that's
and we
perfect.
see it too. So I will sit back and
Good.
enjoy as well. Let's go. Thank you, Eileen.
All right, thank you. So I did title this Age Well with Strong Bones. I did co-create a course with Sid Nodder, who's the author of the Plan A Diet. And you're familiar with Sid. I believe you probably had her on your show, probably more than once. She's a lovely lady. And I had a lot of fun collaborating with her. And I had done an extremely deep dive into the data behind bone health and osteoporosis and osteopenia and the medications. And I cannot tell you how many hours I spent diving into this before I created that course with her. I also actually took a course from a physical therapist who has spent her entire career, decades long, working solely with that population of patient. Now, PTs are very different. You can work in pediatrics, you can work in geriatrics, you can work in sports medicine, you can work in pretty much you can be a hand specialist, you can be a wheelchair fitting specialist. There's all kinds of specialties you can do as a PT. And her specialty was bone health and working with women who had osteoporosis, who had fractures, who had osteopenia. And she's extremely successful at helping people with those issues, doing physical therapy. And what I loved about her course was that she's so deep into the current updated research that she is actually communicating with those clinicians who are actively in studies. So it hasn't even been published yet, and she's communicating with them about their findings. So she couldn't be more updated on the data. And so I took her course as well in case I had missed something when I was scouring the internet. So I just wanted people to know that the most important thing about this presentation is I'm going to share things that might really surprise you. And I'm hoping that, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to try to dial it back into the most cognizant points that matter the most when it comes to your own health and moving forward. And this is very special, this topic to me, because my own mom was absolutely terrified by a medical visit that she had. And this was, oh my goodness, 30 years ago. And she was terrified that her bones were disintegrating. She believed that her spine was disintegrating and she was going to end up in a wheelchair because of a medical visit she had. And my mom lived like 30 years longer after that, never had a fracture, never had any issues with her physical self, her mobility, anything like that. But that visit terrified her. And so I think one of my biggest passions is for people to be well informed and not make decisions out of fear. So you'll see here, I've got my email, I've got my website. If you want to communicate with me, I do my best to get back to emails quickly. If you don't see a response within a couple of days, please check your spam folder because that might be where it went. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So I do have to say that this is for educational purposes only. I do not know what's going on in your world. I am not a doctor. I'm not a physician. And I want to be sure that you know that what I'm sharing is based on the scientific evidence and data. Some it will be based on my own experience as a physical therapist for the past 30 plus years. But I do want you to understand that it's very important that you discuss things with people prior, or with your healthcare practitioner or your prescribing practitioner prior to making any changes based on what you learn here. Okay, next, please. So it is very important that we become informed healthcare consumers, because when we don't know the pros and the cons, and it's a very simple question, the most important question to ask is, how well will this benefit me and what are my risks? That's a very simple question. I mean, people will spend months researching going on vacation, or buying a home, buying a car, and they're not experts in any of those fields, but they look at their lists of pros and cons. They look at what's good, what isn't good. You can ask that question when it comes to medical as well, and that is going to help you to make better choices with improved outcomes. Absolutely. All right, next, please. It's very important that you don't just seek information, because information, while it might be helpful, sometimes it contradicts itself. It's important to deepen your understanding of a specific topic that matters to you. Next, please. So I'm going to present two resources here, this slide and the next slide. And some of the information in this presentation is from this book. Now, I will very openly state that this is an older book, but this is one of the best books I've ever found on this topic, mainly because the authors did such a deep dive. They reviewed over 1,200 studies writing this book. And for some of the topics in the book, they looked at all the studies that had been published since 1975. So this is a phenomenal resource for those of you who are looking to know more about this topic. Next, please. And then my own book, Aging Culprits, I dive into a lot of the topics that aging has been blamed for. And, poor bone health is one of them. And so I do go deeper, especially into medications and things. I opted not to cover those in this talk because I didn't want us to go off on a rabbit trail, and I didn't want people to get confused. So I thought I would really focus more on what you need to know, but also some information that's going to help you with the fear factor. Okay, next, please. So I want to start off with the history behind this, because I think it's very important when we look at a topic that is like literally changing the world when it comes to how people are looked at. Kind of tongue in cheek, I wrote this this booklet. I have to call it a booklet because it's only about 52 pages for some coursework that I was offering at the local community college, and I titled it, "Being Female is Not a Medical Diagnosis." And, I'll repeat that. Being female is not a medical diagnosis. So often, we are looked at because of hormonal changes and life cycles. We're looked at as almost like under a microscope and just medicalized in everything that occurs to us that is pretty much natural, except for the influences that diet and lifestyle have on our physical selves. So, but I wanted you to see the history behind this, because I think it's going to help a lot of you who might have some fear about this topic. And I know this is very sad to relate, but I know some women who are fearful of exercising, fearful of climbing stairs, fearful of doing so many physical things that are required for a long, healthy life, because they're afraid they're going to injure themselves because of this diagnosis. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to share this with you. And I did, in order to earn one of my 3 diplomas, I did a deep dive into this history. So this is factual. Now, the very first box that you'll see there, DEXA scans measure density, not strength. And this is very important for you to understand, because density is what all of the diagnoses are based on, as well as the prescribing medications. But density is not the same as bone strength. And we're going to get into that a little bit before we're done today. And I also want to tell you that normal aging, I could even call that healthy aging, does not equal disease. And you're going to see why I said that very shortly. And then osteopenia was originally termed in history of this for research. It was never designed to be a diagnosis that was treated. And I think that's important for you to grasp as well. And then oftentimes screening creates an overdiagnosis of this topic. So again, I don't want anybody to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is not me telling you, not to listen to your physician. That is not what I'm saying. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. But I want you to have some basic facts to understand this topic more thoroughly. So next slide, please. Back in 1992, the World Health Organization organized a meeting of experts on bone health. And the purpose was to redefine the diagnostic and treatment parameters for osteoporosis, because you had what were, I don't want to say self-declared experts, but you had people focusing on this topic in the medical world all over the world, but none of them were on the same page about what it actually is, why is it happening, what can we do about it. And so this meeting was meant to sort of resolve that issue. There's a problem that occurred with this, however. Next slide, please. The loss of some bone mineral density is a normal marker for aging. So it's not a disease when a woman's bone density lessens over time. Now, yes, it can become a disease if it lessens too much, but we're going to talk about that. Now, the more dense bones in a woman's life cycle are needed when she is of childbearing age. So once that stops and menopause occurs, that's no longer necessary, because childbearing is no longer going to happen. So it's a natural aspect of aging that there would be some loss of bone mineral density. It does not mean that it's a disease. Now, the experts at this meeting redefined osteoporosis as a loss of bone mineral density. That's what occurred at this meeting. And it resulted in almost everyone eventually qualifying for a diagnosis, because if it's a natural aspect of aging and not a disease, and that's how it's defined, then pretty much everybody's going to be diagnosed. Now, yes, there is osteoporosis where the bones are extremely fragile, but there's also a lower bone mineral density where that's not the case. Next slide, please. So, I'm sorry, it's very hard to see these letters for some reason. They are dark green on my slide, but for here they're white. So let me read these to you. That one on the left, an arbitrary level of bone density loss was chosen at this meeting. They weren't sure. And I read some reviews, some some interviews that were done of the people at this meeting, and they said yes, it was very hot in the room. Everybody was getting tired of trying to debate where this point should be chosen on the graph. And so it really was kind of an arbitrary level that was chosen by the experts in the room. And then they determined that the patients who were borderline, who were close to that line, would be labeled as having a new condition called osteopenia or pre-osteoporosis. And so I want to share with you, osteoporosis does not mean that you're going to have a fracture. It's a risk factor for having a fracture. So there's a higher risk of having a fracture if you have osteoporosis than if you do not. Osteopenia is a risk factor for developing osteoporosis, but it doesn't mean you're going to. So technically, osteopenia is a risk factor for a risk factor. So hopefully this is kind of helping to dispel some of the fear and terror that women have about this issue. And then that last slide, that's the source of this. This was on National Public Radio back in December of 2009, and it was titled How a Bone Disease Grew to Fit the Diagnosis. Next slide, please. So Merck, who it is a pharmaceutical company, their marketing department did contract for developing and creating and building much more inexpensive bone scanning devices, because prior to this, you only had a few locations across the country that had the very large, very expensive devices. And so they were actually behind the development of these cheaper scanning devices that could be easily placed in the doctor's offices, looking at your wrists, looking at certain parts of the body. And then they even provided leasing programs that made it easier for the docs to have the machines. They even helped to pass a law mandating that Medicare reimbursed for the scans. Now, yes, it's nice if we don't have to pay for tests, but it's interesting that they were so passionate about getting this to happen for so much of the population. Now, I'm not here to call people bad and, they're looking out for themselves and it's all about money. However, it is a business, and this was something that would bring in more business. Absolutely. Next slide, please. So DEXA scans, let's look a little bit of detail of what they are. Now, the DEXA stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. I know it's a $1 million term there. It does measure bone density, and there are two types. And again, I'm sorry, the slides, when I emailed them, somehow the letters turned white, but they are dark green on mine. So I'm going to read them for you. There are central DEXA devices, and those are the large machines that can measure bone density in the center of the body, like your hips and your spine. And then there are peripheral DEXA devices, and those are much smaller, much more portable machines in the doctor's offices usually, and they're used to measure bone density in areas like your wrist or your heel or your fingers. Next slide, please. So how it works. It uses low energy X-rays that are sent through your bone. So you are getting X-rayed when you have these tests. You are undergoing X-rays. Now there's two sources of the X-ray, and it's measured by a detector on the other side. Your bone will block certain amount of X-ray, and so the denser that your bones are, the less X-ray will get through to the detector, and then the detector provides this to the computer, which calculates the score. Now, there's two different scores of a DEXA. And next slide, please. And this is very important for you to understand, because the T score is the amount of bone a person has compared with a young adult of the same gender at peak bone mass. So if you happen to be in your 70s and they're comparing your bone density to a young woman in her 30s who's of childbearing age, of course, your bone density is going to be less. So a T-score is comparing you to people who are much younger with a higher bone mass. Now, a Z-score is the amount of bone a person has compared with other people in their same age group and pretty much same size and same gender. So that, in my humble opinion, would be a little bit more accurate, because now it's comparing you to other people like you. So if it's unusually high or unusually low, that could indicate a need for further medical tests. So Whenever someone tells me their DEXA score is, I'm like, well, is it a T score or a Z score? And most people are completely clueless. They're like, huh? And they're scratching their head. I don't know. But I think it's important for us to know. Okay. And then if you notice on the bottom of the T-score block, it says reports estimate of the risk of fracture. It doesn't mean you're going to have one. So that fear, usually we don't make good decisions when we're in fear because we're in a sympathetic nervous system mode. We're in a run from the bear mode, and the brain gets kind of foggy and doesn't work really well when we're in that mode. So fear is not our friend when it comes to this. It's important that we get educated and knowledgeable so that we can ask good questions and make the best decisions for us. Okay, next slide. So those tests have been seen to be unreliable in the data. And there's a lot of factors that influence the results of the DEXA scan tests. It's seen that there's a difference between the different manufacturers. So depending on which manufacturer built your machine, you could get a different result. The tech that's operating the machine, there's this inter-tester unreliability that has been seen in the data. So depending on which tech is running the machine, you might get a very different result. Even the clothes that you wear can cause a different result. And if you move during the scan can cause a different result. And that variability ranges from 5 to 6%, which doesn't sound like much, but changes in bone growth and remodeling are measured down to hundredths or thousandths of a decimal point. So this margin of error can actually represent up to 10 years of bone loss that either you have or you don't have, depending on which side of the scale you're on. Next slide, please. So the bone specimens, now this was a study that was done. They took bone specimens and they immersed them in a hydrochloric acid solution to degrade the mineral density. And then they tested them using the DEXA scans. And what the researchers reported was that the bone density of the specimens changed a lot more than what was reported by the scans. So we're seeing some discrepancy here that should cause us to be a little bit concerned about these results that we're taking to heart. And then the next slide, please. This was something that a television show in New Zealand sent a 50-year-old woman to be scanned by 2 different brands. So we're looking at 2 different manufacturers. Now, one manufacturer's machine said that she was slightly below normal when she was tested, and the other machine told her that the results were so far below normal she had osteoporosis. So which is it? Obviously, she can't be both. So it's, to me, this is very concerning because most of what's being based on as far as diagnosis and prescribing is based on the results of these tests. Now, they are coming up with some different aspects to add to these tests to give more accuracy as far as bone health versus bone density. But those are kind of still in the newly emerging phases, and there's yet to be data that concludes that they're any more accurate or reliable. Next slide, please. So the loss of bone mineral density is not only a normal biomarker of aging, which I hope you're catching on to by now, but it's also a poor predictor of fracture risk. There are several studies that have examined this relationship, and their conclusion, this is their conclusion, not mine. We do not recommend a program of screening menopausal women for osteoporosis by measuring bone density. Now, we're not talking about ignoring women and not paying attention to what's going on in their bodies physiologically, anatomically, medically. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is that measuring bone density isn't the end all be all that we should be basing all of our information on. So we're going to look at a couple of slides here about what other experts say. So next slide, please. So the Office of Health Technology Assessment in the University of British Columbia tells us that research evidence does not support either whole population or selective bone mineral density testing of well women at or near menopause as a means to predict future fractures because it's not accurate. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force says there's insufficient evidence to recommend for or against routine screening for osteoporosis with bone densitometry in postmenopausal women. So they're saying we really don't have enough to say whether we should do it or not do it. And then the Swedish Council on Technology Assessment in Healthcare says there's no scientific basis for recommending bone density measurement in mass screening, selective screening, or as an extra component in health checkups of asymptomatic individuals. They call it opportunistic screening. Asymptomatic means you have no symptoms. So I know it's considered, this silent issue, but hopefully some of this information is going to help you to realize, this isn't like when you're going to have your first heart attack and you don't survive it and you weren't diagnosed with cardiovascular disease prior to the event. That's not what this is. This is a very different animal. Next slide, please. So the University of Newcastle Osteoporosis Study Group in Australia, in summary, the measurement of bone mineral density is not a useful screening test for the identification of women at high risk of hip fracture and requiring preventative treatment with estrogens. And then the Effective Healthcare Bulletin in the UK, given the current evidence, it would be inadvisable to establish a routine population-based bone screening program for menopausal women with the aim of preventing fractures. So all of these on these last two slides has to do with preventing fractures, and that's the number one reason women are concerned, because they don't want to get a fracture. How many are told, oh, you don't want to fall and break your hip because, if you break your hip, you're going to end up in a nursing home. And, if you end up in a nursing home, a lot of people end up dying within the first year of going to a nursing home after they break a hip. Well, I want to share something right now, and this is very important for you to know. That is a very inaccurate statement, and it takes everything out of context. I've worked in nursing home settings for almost a decade. I've done home care for over a decade. I'm very familiar with that population, and I will tell you right now, no one went to a nursing home and died because of a broken hip. They went to a nursing home and died because they had multiple medical conditions. They were already debilitated prior to the fall. They were already using a walker, a cane, a wheelchair even. They had a shoebox full of medications. And I do not say this to sound callous, but they would have died within a year anyway. They had so many other health concerns and issues going on. Their life was not long for this world. So the hip fracture simply put them in the nursing home a little bit quicker, but it did not kill them off faster. Yes, they were more bedbound, but hopefully you can hear what I'm saying here. So please don't let that statement from anyone who's well-meaning, but kind of ignorant of the facts, sharing that with you, because I've been there, I've seen it, and it is not true. Okay? You can hear my passion, I hope. I hate when people are told things that scare them to death and it's not true. All right. Okay. Next slide, please. So bone mass does not predict fracture risk. And I hope this is starting to sink in. The incidence of fractures in Asian women is much lower than Caucasian women who have relatively higher bone mass. So if Asian women have relatively lower bone mass, but their incidence of fractures is less, something's going on here, right? Next slide, please. Here's where we looked at, over 800 women in a very good age range, 35 to 75. And this was from rural counties in mainland China. Their calcium intake is a lot less than ours when we're told to, got milk for strong bones kind of thing, which PCRM sued them and they had to take those down anyway. But nobody ever put up a sign that said they lost a lawsuit and that's why they were missing. But I don't want to digress. So, their calcium intake is less than the average American woman. Almost all were over the age of 50. They had bone mass lower than the fracture threshold that is set for American Caucasian women. Most had no signs of osteoporosis, and less than 4% of women reported fractures in their lifetime. So bone mass density does not predict fracture risk. Next slide, please. So the elephant in the room, does anyone have osteoporosis? Absolutely, yes. And why? These are the most common reasons. Sedentary lifestyle, just not moving, getting weak, losing, muscle. long-term exposure to the standard American diet. And I'm going to touch on that very briefly. And then drug use, or I should say medication use, prescription use, such as steroids, which are used for a lot of different things. If somebody has serious respiratory issues, steroids can be a life-saving alternative. And there are many other issues that steroids are used for that can really help, but the side effects are horrific. And then we've got malabsorption from inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's. So the person is not absorbing what they need nutrition wise. And then people who avoid all sun exposure because we need our vitamin D. And I'm not going to get off on a tangent about vitamin D in this topic, but it's important for you to know that the sun is not our enemy. If we didn't have the sun, this frozen rock would not support life. So it's very important. Next slide, please. So, why do bones fracture? Well, it's not due to thinning bones alone. Osteoporosis does not cause fractures because half the people who have osteoporosis don't even experience fractures. And after losing 50% of bone mass, vertebrae are known to be strong enough to withstand 5 times the normal strain people place on bones. So it's not this horrible thing that we're thinking it is. And people in some populations experience more bone loss than Americans, and the fracture rate is much lower. Fracture rates vary 30-fold for women. That's a huge variable. So what's responsible for that? It can't just be the bone density, and 16-fold for men. Next slide, please. So osteoporosis is our body's response to diet and lifestyle habits. It actually represents the short-term coping mechanism that the body undergoes. When blood levels of certain minerals are low, the bones supply them. That's part of their job. Bones that are high in trabecular tissue, there's different types of bone tissue. Those are the first to show the changes that are negative in the jaw, the wrist, and the spine. Now, this doesn't happen in isolation because it's almost always accompanied by other degenerative conditions. And diet can be a major contributing factor. A very high acid load, which we're going to talk about shortly, the calcium is used to buffer that load. Next slide, please. So bone loss is not due to hormones. And I know, there's a book, and I meant to put that slide in here, and for some reason the title of the book is not coming to me, but it was written long ago, back in the 70s. And this particular physician said that, women, when they go through menopause, because of the loss of estrogen, all of these things happen to them. And one of them happens to be osteoporosis. And it's not true. Now, because bone loss accelerates during menopause, because you're no longer of childbearing age and you don't need to keep that density, some doctors hypothesized that osteoporosis is caused by drops in estrogen levels. That's what we would consider in the data an error of attribution. You're attributing something to something that it's an error. It's kind of like saying, well, that street over there, everybody's got cardiovascular disease, and there's an awful lot of telephone poles over there. Must be the telephone poles causing the problem. So hopefully you see what I'm saying. It's based on a faulty design theory. The theory is that women are designed to maintain high estrogen levels throughout their lifetime. That is not true. Down at the bottom here, women require bigger calcium stores in their bones to support pregnancy and breastfeeding. After menopause, there's no need to maintain the higher calcium stores, so the bones become less dense. Postmenopausal women in many other cultures do not have high fracture rates, even though they lose bone density. So I know I'm kind of repeating myself in some of this, but repetition is good because it helps us to get it. Next slide, please. So again, bone loss is not due to hormones. Vegetarian women have lower estrogen levels, but some studies show higher bone density than meat eaters. And this is in the older years. Much of vertebral bone loss for American women takes place before menopause. Before menopause. So it can't be due to hormones. Next slide. So we're going to look at some bone health factors. We're going to, natural bone density decreases with age. And I know I keep repeating that. Lifestyle and diet are the real factors in osteoporosis. And I'm talking actual osteoporosis, not just low bone mineral density. Bone is living tissue. It is constantly remodeling. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides that'll be very easy for you to understand this shortly. Next slide, please. So, bone health factors. These are the factors that matter. Your diet. What are you eating? The acid alkaline balance. If you exercise or if you're inactive. How is your GI health? Do you have malabsorption issues? Are you not able to absorb the nutrition from food? Are you getting sunlight and making a healthy amount of vitamin D? Are you using prescription drugs that will cause these issues to happen? I mean, there's a lot of drugs out there that, and prednisone, steroids are one of the most offending factors, but there are others. And then kidney function. How's the kidney function? Because that impacts what's going on with your calcium stores and levels, and then specific disease conditions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into the breakdown and build up of bone design, but very simple, on a very simple level. But it's really important that you get this. Okay, next slide. So bone remodeling. It's a very complex signaling and control mechanism. It is extremely complex, and I could teach on this for a week, but I want to keep it very simple. You can see all of the hormones here. You can see you got your parathyroid hormone, and this is where some of the new classes of osteoporotic drugs are based on, is the parathyroid hormone and affecting that, which is not necessarily a good thing. And again, I had to kind of limit what I'm presenting here, but and then we've got the vitamin D, which is impacted, growth hormones, steroids, calcitonin, cytokines. And that steroids, that I'm not talking about medication induced or taken steroids. I'm talking about, the body. And then calcitonin, cytokines, growth factors, and then K2. I'm thinking most of you listening have heard of vitamin K. And some people who are on blood thinners, they're told, don't eat a lot of greens because there's a lot of vitamin K in there. It's a clotting factor. Well, there's K1 and K2. And K2, its job is to activate the proteins that escort calcium into our bones and keep it out of soft tissues like blood vessels and the heart. And that vitamin K2 activated protein that puts calcium into our bones is called osteocalcin. So that's, you kind of want to know about that. And I'm going to show you a slide in a moment that will tell you why that's important. But just know that your bones contain 99% of the calcium in your body. And they do behave as an adequate buffer for maintaining this constant level of freely moving calcium in your soft tissues, your extracellular fluid, and your blood. Next slide, please. So vitamin K was discovered back in 1929, and it was found to be an essential nutrient for coagulating blood. So you don't bleed to death. There are people who have disease where if they get cut and they don't clot, their blood does not coagulate. And this is the scientific term for blood clotting. And now, one of its most important functions, as you can read here, is to regulate where calcium gets deposited. So what it can do is it can promote calcification of your bones and prevent calcification of your blood vessels and kidneys, because you don't want it there. Now there's K1, which is phyloquinone, and that's found in plant foods like leafy greens. So yes, eat your greens. But there's K2, which I just talked about, and that is found in animal foods and fermented foods. Now, because we know the animal foods are not necessarily our friend for long-term health, yes, fermented foods can be helpful. I happen to love like hot, spicy pickles, but produced by gut bacteria. That's what we want. We want a healthy gut function. We want a good microbiome in our gut so that we're producing K2. That's critical. Next slide, please. So some of you may have heard me talk in the past, and I've mentioned the calcium paradox because it's seen in the data that, oh my gosh, the people who take in more dairy products have a higher fracture rate, or the people who take in more calcium supplements have a higher fracture rate. That makes no sense. And so that's kind of, calcium paradox is sort of loosely termed to that. But when you look at the history, this term was actually coined because of heart transplants. So next slide, please. So initially, it was used when they were actually doing heart transplants. And more recent, it's in countries where calcium intake is high and dairy foods are a major player in the diet. And these are in certain countries like Finland, Sweden, Netherlands. Population is still at very high risk for osteoporosis, and this does include the US, Canada, and Europe. And there was a 2010 study that reported calcium supplementation increased the risk of heart attacks and strokes. But let me tell you what happened during the transplant. So if a calcium-free solution is used to keep the fluid pouring through the heart muscle during the transplant surgery, even for a short time, if a calcium-free solution is used, then a solution containing a normal amount of calcium is used, the heart becomes severely damaged. Because what happens is a massive influx of calcium rushes into the calcium depleted heart muscle cells in the transplant heart, and it disrupts the function of the heart and causes major injury. So that's where calcium paradox first came in, but it's now used for the point of, oh my gosh, if people are getting a lot of calcium from dairy or supplementation, we're seeing all these other issues happening. Next slide, please. So, acid alkaline balance. Your blood pH, the pH of your blood, has to be in a very narrow window between 7.35 and 7.45. Your body controls it tightly to keep you alive. And even minor fluctuations can adversely affect many organs, leading to some very serious health issues. So, if you eat a large amount of high acid foods like animal protein, combined with the challenge for your kidneys to excrete the waste byproducts from these foods, and I'm talking the end result of the digestion process, this can cause the release of buffering agents from bones, including calcium. Dairy products are acid forming. Hard cheeses are the most acidic of all foods. And the body will always maintain that blood pH in range. It will use alkalizing minerals from the bone as needed. So it's these buffering systems. They're in place to prevent dietary and metabolic acids from shifting that pH, that homeostasis that's required for life. So it's really important that you know this. Your kidneys will eliminate excess hydrogen ions, which are acids, through the urine. Your lungs will eliminate carbon dioxide from breathing. And then, these are your buffer systems. And then you've got buffer salts. They're stored reserves of alkaline minerals that are drawn upon to neutralize acids. So your body knows what it's doing. Next slide, please. But unfortunately, when we are consuming a lot of animal protein, the digestion process releases excess nitrogen, because protein is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. There's no nitrogen. So when you're consuming a lot of these animal proteins, you're getting excess nitrogen, and your body has to digest that. And so it metabolizes, and you end up with uric acid and sulfuric acid, and that will end up in the bloodstream. So calcium from the bones is used to buffer the acid. Now, I know recently there have been some experts online who have shared some information that this may not be completely accurate. I've looked at what they report, and I'm not convinced to change my mind. I don't believe that some of the studies that were shown really say this isn't what's happening. So I'm on the fence. I don't yet. I have not been convinced that this is not the case. And these studies have been done. I could paper my office walls with these studies that have shown that a higher protein intake results in increased urinary calcium loss. The higher the protein intake, the higher the calcium excretion. So I tell people, well, the more animal foods that you want to consume, it's kind of like you're flushing your bones down the toilet. If that's, not a concern to you, then keep eating your animal foods. But high protein foods like meat, dairy products, and grains tend to be high in sulfur containing amino acids. Now, I'm not telling you not to consume the grains, okay? But the byproducts of protein metabolism are really the problem. Fruits, veggies, on the other hand, don't contain high levels of these acid forming amino acids, and instead they have a predominantly alkaline forming mineral composition. Next slide, please. So people consuming a diet with lower calcium intake do not develop health issues or impaired bone development as a result. And then high calcium diet results in lower calcium absorption. Lower calcium intake results in higher calcium absorption. It's interesting how the body does this. It sort of becomes a sponge when it needs to, and it sort of becomes a reflecting magnet when it needs to. It's going to adjust what you're taking in unless you're forcing things on it. Next slide. So I wanted you to understand, because some people are kind of confused about the pH scale and food. So the pH scale measures the saturation of hydrogen ions in a solution. The more hydrogen ions, the more acidic a solution is. So you can see way over here, this is going to be like, this will burn a hole through metal. And then this is very alkaline, which can also be harmful to the body, because remember, we want to be at 7.35 to 7.45. So we're kind of on the neutral scale, pretty much, just slightly alkaline. Like we're talking a smidge alkaline. We're mostly neutral. Next slide, please. So I wanted, because some people think, oh my gosh, if an acid load is a problem when I'm eating foods, I don't want to eat the acidic foods. Well, if you look at this slide, it's not true. We've got the lemons and limes and things are way over here, high on the alkaline scale. So it's what happens when you digest the food that leads to the high acid load. It's not the food itself. So, you can't take a pH strip and test your food on your plate and know what that's going to do in your body. That's not how it works. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So diet and bone health. Now, according to the National Academy of Sciences, 1 gram of protein increases calcium excretion by 1 to 1.5 milligrams. So if a 4-ounce serving of meat has 20 grams of protein, that can result in up to 30 milligrams of calcium lost. So reducing animal protein results in reduced calcium excretion. Next slide. So building strong bones. This is, I'm sure, what every one of you here wants to learn and understand. What do we need to do so that we can have bones that will last us a lifetime, as long as we're above ground, and do the job we need them to do without fracturing, without injury? Next slide, please. So exercise does build bone mass. Exercise increases the flow of nutrients to the bones. Weight-bearing exercise is the most effective. Now, excessive exercise does not induce bone loss, but athletes, athletic amenorrhea does. So those are the young women athletes who are not having a monthly cycle because their activity level is so extreme. That can induce some bone loss. Okay. And then you can see over on the right here, physical activity stimulates activity of osteoclasts and osteoblasts. And then the more strenuous the activity, the stronger bones become. So osteoclasts and osteoblasts. I have 2 slides that's going to explain this to you very simply. Next slide, please. So bone remodeling. You can see on one side here, we've got osteoclasts. They kind of look like little Pac-Men. I remember when Ms. Pac-Man was very popular when I was younger, and I loved that game, and I got pretty good at it. And so what they did was those Pac-Men, they went around munching the other things that were in the way. And we can see osteoblasts here. Now, if you remember osteoclasts, CL for cleaning, they clean up dead bone. And then osteoblasts, the B, and think of Bob the Builder. If you have a son or a child or a grandchild who used to watch Bob the Builder, I don't even know if that's still on, but osteoblasts are building bone. So there's this remodeling that goes on. So these tiny little cells that are found along the bone lining and in the bone itself, what they do is they have a lifespan. And the lifespan of the osteoclasts is from a few hours to at most a few days, while that of the osteoblasts is a few days to at most a few weeks. So the builders have a longer lifespan than the cleaners. Okay, next slide, please. So we've also got something called osteocytes over here. Here's the osteoblasts. Here's the osteoclasts. And then you see here, we've got some pre-osteoblasts. They're getting ready to become full-blown blasts that can build bone. And so what happens is those osteocytes, they're cells inside mature bone tissue. And they are what respond to changes in tension and pressure in and around your bones. So if something puts enough pressure on your bone, like weight-bearing exercise, the osteocytes trigger this chemical reaction that alerts the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts to repair damage and grow new bone in an affected area. Now, the osteoclasts only target specific areas that have been tagged by the osteocytes. And then the enzyme osteoclasts breaks down that hardened bone matrix and reabsorbs it into your body. This will leave little microscopic pits and divots on the surface of your bone. Once that targeted tissue in those places is dissolved, that's when the osteoblasts move in and deposit new bone in the same spot. So you can see it's this beautiful design of the osteocytes getting triggered by a lot of pressure. And then the osteoclasts go in there and clean up the damaged or injured bone cells. They leave these little marks, these little, you can almost call them like bone scars, teeny tiny microscopic. And then the osteoblasts are triggered. Okay, let's go in and build new bone. So it's a very complicated process, but hopefully I just explained it fairly simply to you so you can understand why each and every one of these stages matter. And I can tell you right now that the majority of the osteoporosis medications are aimed at reducing the osteoclast activity. So when that happens, they don't go in and clean up the dead bone. The osteoblasts don't get triggered to go in and deposit new bone. So you can actually end up with more fragile bone from the action those medications create. And I know many of you are probably sitting there going, what? Huh? And so please, read my book, watch Sid Notter and I created, Age Well for Strong Bones, Age Well with Strong Bones, sorry. And I go into the detail of those medications in that course as well. I just didn't have the time today to do it. Maybe I can come back at another time and go into that. But next slide, please. So exercising regularly reduces the rate of bone loss and conserves bone tissue, lowering the risk of fractures. And you just learned exactly how. The National Osteoporosis Foundation suggests high or low impact weight bearing and muscle strengthening exercises to prevent osteoporosis. Now, remember, bone density decrease is normal as we age. It doesn't mean that we have osteoporosis, but to prevent osteoporosis, this is what we want to do. Jumping, jogging, aerobics as high impact exercises, as well as walking and step aerobics as lower impact exercises. Now, again, this depends on where you're at, and I don't want anybody to hurt themselves. Make sure it's okay for you to do what you decide to start doing if you haven't been already doing it. Next slide, please. We are almost at the end here. So weight-bearing aerobic exercises, these are impact activities, or any other exercise where your arms, your feet, your legs are bearing the weight. So walking, stair climbing, jogging, volleyball, tennis, and similar sports, even Tai Chi and dancing. Now, the scientific data does report some differences from these, okay? Strength and or resistance exercises. This is when your joints are moved against some kind of resistance. So you're using free weights or machines or TheraTubing or TheraBands or your own body weight. And then there is whole body vibration. Training with vibrating platforms is reported to have an effect on enhancing muscle strength, improving balance, and reducing the risk of fall. However, it's controversial findings on improvement of bone mineral density in different sites. So yes, improving your muscle strength, improving your balance, reducing the risk of falls is huge. The evidence is inconclusive so far on actual bone mineral density improvement. But remember, bone mineral density isn't necessarily equal to bone strength. You can make your bones stronger by doing all of these things. Okay. You know, according to the latest data that I looked at, and I could have missed something, and I know a lot of people are asking about these vibration plates. Whole body vibration does reduce the fall rate, but it is reported in the literature to have no overall effect on bone mineral density or microarchitecture. There were some significant but small improvements in bone mineral density in post-menopausal women and children and adolescents, but not in young adults. So, you know, it's inconclusive. Next slide, please. So, isolated exercise, like single bout training, that will provide a fleeting bone building stimulation, but you've got to keep going. You need longer training. Like 2 times a day for 5 weeks will provide a much better stimulation. Aerobic exercise is particularly effective in that activation of the osteoblasts because it gets the osteocytes really stimulated. So it's very important to combine aerobic and anaerobic exercises in bone building protocols. So some aerobic work, some jogging, some aerobic class, whatever, and some weight bearing would be an ideal combination. Next slide, please. So what is the best exercise to reverse osteoporosis? Now, there are several critical issues in the evaluation of evidence, and they do limit in some way the conclusion of the reviews that I'm quoting from. There was a Cochrane review regarding the methods. There were several exercises proposed in the literature. There were relevant differences in the type and in the setting where the exercises were carried out, how intense were they, the duration, the frequency, the total duration of the program, you know, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. Also, you got sample size, patients' compliance or adherence to the study, you know, did they do it? And then the presence of a control group, because if you don't have a control group that's not doing what the study group is doing, we can't really say that what they did is what caused the difference. And then how many years were they past menopause, the follow-ups reported. So there was a lot of diversity in the data. But basically, strength training exercises, especially those for the upper back, weight-bearing aerobic activities like walking and running. Now, yes, you can take a leisurely stroll to reduce your cortisol level, which helps to get rid of some of that fat deposited in your trunk because that's from stress. And walking in nature, especially, is very good at reducing cortisol. But you want to be walking like you mean business if you want to do it as an aerobic activity. You know, when you want to be huffing and puffing a little bit, where you couldn't sing a song, but you can at least still talk. And then flexibility exercises, those are more for the let's improve our ability to move. The stability and balance exercises, that's about reducing your risk of fall, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So, you know, exercise and bone density, it is greater in people with physically demanding jobs. Athletes have greater bone density and it's dose dependent. The more active they are, the more dense their bones are. An exercise training program can increase bone mass between 5 and 10%. And we're talking bone mass there, not necessarily mineral density. And then athletes involved in high impact sports, they have substantially higher bone mineral density than those involved in moderate impact sports. And I will tell you that I remember looking at data some time ago where if somebody does cycling, they have less dense spines than those who run. Runners have more dense spines because you've got more impact. Cycling is less impact. Next slide, please. So muscle mass is the most accurate predictor of bone strength. So if you are weakened and you are lacking muscle, well, your bone strength is probably not ideal. Stronger back muscles equate to stronger vertebrae in the back and hip bones, and fitness is an indicator of bone health and strength. Next slide, please. Inactivity. Bone and muscle atrophy, muscles shrinking, getting smaller, getting weaker. Right? Bone and muscle atrophy fast during bed rest, very quickly. 3 weeks of bed rest can radically change somebody's health, even in their 20s. So when bones are broken or when activity is reduced for any reason, about 1% of lumbar spine mass is lost per week during hospitalization. The body does try to compensate, But once 30% of that specific trabecular bone is lost, bone loss stops. So the body will only allow so much to be lost. However, you will lose some. And movement in the bed does not reverse bone loss. Standing 2 or more hours per day does. Next, please. So other factors matter more. This was a study done, printed in the, published, I should say, sorry, in the British Medical Journal. The accurate risk of fracture prediction rate. This was more accurate than bone mineral density. 96% in the men, 93% in the women. What they looked at was body sway and muscle strength. Body sway is determined by how stable are you when you're upright and what's going on if you're closing your eyes, and the muscle strength. That was an extremely accurate risk of fracture prediction rates. Next slide, please. So the good news as we finish here. Next, please. Healthy bones. A low-fat, plant-based diet is better for preserving bone density, while a diet high in animal foods promotes loss of bone density. Next, please. Weight-bearing exercises. Walking, hiking, climbing stairs, lifting weights, free weights, body weight, resistance bands, dancing, Zumba, low-impact step aerobics. If for prevention, you can do high impact, running, jogging, etc. Now, this is a kind of a warning here. Swimming is not a weight-bearing activity because of the buoyancy of the water. It's beautiful if you've got arthritic joints, and painful with weight-bearing because you can get stronger in the water. But because of the buoyancy, it does not increase bone density. So if you love swimming for other reasons, please don't consider that your prevention strategy for bone health. Next, please. So, osteoporosis precautions. Check with your primary care physician. These are things you do not want to do. And I thought this was very important for everybody to know. If you have osteoporosis and your spine is considered osteoporotic, forward bending, touching toes, can put you at risk of a spinal fracture. Crunches and sit-ups, the same thing because of that motion. High impact aerobics, you want to go with low impact aerobics. Jogging and running would not necessarily be your friend. Jumping rope. And now this is especially people who have a fracture history. High twist activities can also be contraindicated. It's going to depend on your healthcare practitioner telling you. So like golf, because of that big twist in the swing, bowling, tennis, yoga, etc. Make sure what you're going to do is safe for you. In yoga, there are certain poses. You want to limit the rounding poses, the deep twist, the deep hip stretches, warrior one, and overpressure from instructors. I've seen some instructors walk around a room and try to help somebody get down deeper into a pose. That could be completely detrimental to you, depending on your history. And remember, swimming is not a weight-bearing activity. Okay, so I thought it was important for people to have these. Next slide, please. So bottom line, bone density loss is not a disease. It's a natural aspect of aging. Depends on how much loss you've had. Okay. Strong bones come from lifestyle, not drugs. Medications, you really got to be eating properly. You've got to be doing weight-bearing exercises. You've got to be active. You cannot lay on the sofa and take medications and have strong bones. And it's never too late to improve bone health. Next, please. So inactivity, rapid bone and muscle loss. Weight-bearing exercise strengthens bones. The more activity, the denser the bones. The stronger the muscles, the stronger the bones. Again, it is never too late to improve bone health. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. I'm going to talk, and I have an event coming up next week. So timing is perfect here, hopefully for those of you who see this, unless it's a recording a year from now. But I'm going to be, this is my number 34 in my free online events since August of 2020. I love doing these. I'm probably going to give out some prizes. I just get so excited at teaching things to people that can improve their life. And this is a 3-day event. It's just an hour a day. The first day I'm going to talk about, I'm going to kind of blow out of the water the age-related thing. So we're going to blow out of the water the age-related weight gain, the age-related lean muscle loss, and the age-related joint pain. And I'm going to show you what you can do about it. So that is pretty much everything. And hopefully I didn't go way over our time. And I'm happy to answer any questions depending on your time frame, Jennifer.
Oh my gosh, this is incredible. That was so educational. I just really enjoyed it. And I wrote and took my own notes and questions too. My time is fine as long as as long as it's okay with you. And I do see some questions in the chat. So maybe we'll start with that. So let's see. I had a question from, is it, oh, Jill. Oh, Jill. Okay. Is this info in Eileen's book talking about the T and Z scores?
I believe it is. I'm pretty sure it is. Yes. I'm sorry that I can't say positively because I've written so many newsletters and articles and, for like the National Health Association, I've written articles for that. I mean, I forget sometimes where I put stuff, but I'm pretty sure that it is in that book. I cover a lot of topics like urinary incontinence, and I'm pretty sure. Yes.
Okay. And so, yeah, just to touch on that again, because I think that's really important. I know I've had DEXA scans recently, and, it can be very confusing about the T score and the Z score, and they're all kind of lumped together and which is what. And I really loved, how you were sharing that the Z score is the one that we really need to pay attention to because it's closer to, like, comparing us to someone that's like our age and gender and all of those things versus the T score, which is somebody that's, in their 30s. And depending on where we were, it's not really a comparison. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. A plus.
Yay. So hopefully that helps you, Jill, as well. And so, I know you touched on so many wonderful things. So I did want to just for a second, you mentioned that your mom had a scare at the doctor's office. I personally experienced that same thing.
Mm.
And, I was told like 10 years ago by an endocrinologist, if I don't do the injections, which there are different types of injections, medication that was recommended for me for bone health because I do have osteoporosis, which has been improving without medication. But at the time, she was telling me, like, if you don't do this, you're going to fracture your spine and you're going to be paralyzed and you're going to be in a wheelchair and your family is going to be taking care of you, on and on and on. And you know what? I I had already many years earlier done the Fosamax in my 40s, way before menopause or perimenopause. So when you said that, I thought that was interesting, that it's not really caused necessarily by our hormones because it happened earlier. But when she said that to me, I knew going in what I wanted. And I knew that I needed to make sure that I just double check and triple check my information and what I believe in. I did look into what she said and I decided against it. And I
Mm.
did not go back to that doctor.
Yes. Yes.
And she's very good at certain things, but it was a scare tactic and it can really scare
Yes.
us, especially when we are, kind of programmed to listen to what the doctor says, and so
And in all fairness to the healthcare professional, they do see bad things happen to people. And so they feel responsible and they don't want to see any bad things happen to any other people. So, and this is the best information they have. People can only share what they know. They can't share what they don't know. So I maybe shouldn't assume this, but I'm kind of assuming she knows nothing about the impact that a whole food plant-based diet can have on health and so on and so forth. So they can't share what they don't know. However, the scare tactic, I've met with healthcare professionals who that's kind of their bedside manner, is to intimidate people into doing what they want because they believe they know best. And that's what they've decided is their way to interact with their patient population. I don't agree. that it's the best way to do it. I believe that there's much better ways. And I won't get off on tangents, but I've met with some who were very good at sharing information and then respecting my decision based on informing me. And I think that's the most important thing. I think there could have been ways for her to better inform you without trying to terrify you.
Right.
Yes.
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 So if it's happened to your mother and it's happened to me, I'm sure that, it's a possibility that it's happened to people watching or someone that they know. And so I really
Mhm.
wanted to touch on that, I like to just take the information, go home, don't make any decisions right there on the spot, and take some time to dig deeper, like you said, and make the decision that works for you best.
Yes,
And
and like you said, take the time, because if you're reacting to fear, you're not going to make the best decision for yourself. Nobody makes a good decision when they're fearful. I mean, look at all the decisions made, when the world went nuts. I mean, on both sides of the fence, no matter what side you sat on, nobody was making good decisions because of fear. So, yeah.
yeah, and another thing, when you talk about food, I know that I have a family member and several that have been told to not eat acidic foods. And I asked, what does that mean? What were you told? Well, I was told no tomatoes, no acidic, no citrus, no lemon, no orange. And I was thinking like that, that's not really what somebody means when they're talking about acidic food. And you had this beautiful chart that showed acidic, is the animal products, the dairy, and it's it can be also confusing when people think
Yes.
of or are told it's the fruits and vegetables or the citrus. So I would love it if you want to comment about you know how important that is to understand the difference.
Yes. Now, there might be different reasons somebody's told you to refrain from acidic foods that are pH acidic before you eat it. And that's the difference. If you test the food before you eat it and it's acidic, that would be lemons, limes, tomato, those kind of things. So there might be some different reason, a GI reason the person wasn't supposed to have those foods. I don't know. But when it comes to, because we're told, oh, don't eat a high acid load diet, people automatically think that means acidic foods. It's not the food itself, it's what happens after we digest it. Does it impact the pH of our body so that our body has to buffer that pH? And so, as you saw on that scale, a lot of foods that are not acidic at all end up being acidic in our body after we digest it, and we have to buffer. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I know I've heard people on the fence. It's kind of, kind of a belief, I guess, or not, about osteopenia. I
Mm,
personally believe osteopenia is normal for postmenopausal women, for myself included, whereas some people are told, I've been diagnosed, like you had said, with osteopenia, and I need to do all these things, whatever is recommended to them, medications and so on. What,
yes.
so where are you on that spectrum? Is it normal? Is it not?
Yes. So again, looking at the Z-score would be more accurate. And again, bone mineral density is not an accurate predictor of risk of fracture. So we have to kind of pull back and sort of do this overlook of what's going on with this topic, because we get caught in the weeds and now we're making confusing statements, and we don't understand what we're doing. So if decrease in bone mineral density is a natural aspect of aging in a woman's lifespan, then osteopenia would really not be a disease that
Yes.
requires treatment. Now, if somebody has a really sedentary lifestyle and a less than healthy diet, they might want to start paying attention to those aspects of their life to be sure that the bone mineral density doesn't decline to the point where the bones are now at risk, a higher risk for fracture.
Hmm.
So, but as you saw, even half the people who have osteoporosis don't experience a fracture because
Right.
it's a risk factor. It says you're at a higher risk, but it doesn't mean you're going to have one.
Yes, yes. And I can say for myself, I have not had any fractures, and I have been
Yes.
dealing with, this for a long time. I'm personally right now and often wear a weighted vest. I do a lot of weight bearing exercises. It was great to hear what you said about that, about, the different kinds of exercises and where a person should, look to see where they are and what's helpful, and that swimming is not really for bone health. You know, I'm careful about my posture. And, you didn't mention a weighted vest. So I'm wondering, do you have anything to say about somebody wearing a weighted vest? I also do wrist weights and belts and, all kinds of weights.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, um, I did do a recent deep dive into the weighted vest clinical study milieu, if you want to call it that,
Wow.
because they have been extremely promoted, some by healthcare practitioners and some by, obviously companies love to make money. That's what they do. And they do their best to produce a high quality product that is going to be wanted by the public. So, so it's very well promoted out there. It's massively promoted out there. So I took a dive into the research. I've only spent a couple days looking at that research. Um, and what I found was there's a couple of things that people really need to be very aware of. One of them is if you have spinal stenosis, you do not want to be wearing a weighted vest. If you have neck issues, shoulder issues, you do not want to be wearing a weighted vest. Okay. And a lot of the studies that were done, the participants had to stop the study because they had like arthritis in their knees, and the added weight really caused problems there and all of that. Now, the best study that I could find did show a good increase in hip bone density. The issue was they didn't have a, a control group. So the exercises themselves were very well done. I mean, it was one of the best, and they kept saying that a lot of the different studies, it's different exercises, different lengths of time, different intensities, different this, different that, like all the things I read off that one slide. So it was a fabulously well designed exercise program, but everybody in this study was wearing the weighted vest. So we don't know how much of that was increased by the vest. It would have been nice if they'd have done the study where they did the exercises without the vest, because we could have seen, did the vest really make a big difference? But my professional and personal opinion is that I don't believe it can harm you if you don't have reasons to not wear it. And it's similar, it's a lot easier than carrying weights sometimes. When if you're going to run and you want to add some weight bearing to that, carrying weights could be a little bit challenging. So it's going to be easier for some women who can't really do that. So I haven't found anything that says nobody should do it or it absolutely doesn't work. I'm just not horribly convinced that it makes a big difference in the data. But I could have missed some studies. I certainly didn't scour, the entire internet. But I did do my best to look. And the studies that do report it do show improvements. But again, if you don't have the study, the control group, it's kind of hard to attribute it.
Yeah, too bad for that. Oh gosh, you got me excited about that. Well, I'm always open to exploring any of that in the future with you. I did have quite a great improvement on my last score, a year and a half difference between
Yes.
the timing
Yes.
that I had it, and I
And
had.
I noticed, if you don't mind my
Yeah,
interrupting, I
yeah.
noticed you're doing a lot of things. I was watching some of your videos. You're very um, motivational. And I love the way you share. You have such a heart on camera, and it's very obvious. So I'm sure your audience just loves you. But you're doing that beautiful jumping to get that going. You're doing a lot of exercising. You're doing a lot of things. So, the vest may be adding to that and giving
Yeah.
you that little extra oomph. Yeah, there's no way of knowing.
Yes, thank you so much. What a kind thing for you to say. And you know what? I do try to do a lot of different things and not depend on one thing and not stay in the same because I think, after a while, the bones are smart, the body is smart, the muscles are smart, and they're going to be like, oh, we've done this. So,
Yes, the body loves variety. That's why I've
yeah.
got 52 different workouts in the private club. The body loves variety. Yes.
Yes, yes. And so I just want to just quickly mention that my scores went up 7% in my spine. And
Yay! I wish
not
I
a
knew how to make all the
yeah,
balloons go up on the screen.
not on medication. And so I just feel like you have to put in the work. You have to do it safe. Like you said, you should check with your PCP or your professional doctor and make sure that it's safe for you, right? Like what you said, if you have certain things compressing the spine, the neck, and injuries in the shoulder, I mean, of course, it's not for everyone. But, if it is something that you could do, it's
But that
another
one
thing to
expert,
have in your pocket.
yes, that one expert that I mentioned, she takes women who are like, severely osteoporotic, and she teaches them how to do, some deadlifts, and she gets them up to deadlifting 50 pounds
Nice.
safely. So it doesn't mean you can't do things. It just means you have to make sure that you've got somebody watching you that you're doing it correctly, because you have to do a straight back bend. You have to bend at the hip. And what you do is you take a pole, and I show this in that course I did with Sid. You take a pole and make sure that it's hitting your back of your head and your tailbone so that your spine is straight. And so when you bend, you're bending at the hip only. And that will radically reduce your risk of harming your spine with the forward bend. So there are things that you can do to still get stronger and improve bone density no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I love that. And I do know Sid, I've worked with her. She is just an amazing wealth of information as well. And how lucky to have you two together. And so I would love to learn more about where people can get that course that you talk about. Maybe you can email that. And is it a paid course that people can?
Yes, that is a paid course. And if you go to my main website, which was on the first slide, you'll see that offer under classes. But I can certainly provide the link to you as well if people
Yeah,
want
that
to
would
check
be
it out.
great. Okay. Now, I do want to say I wrote this because I thought this was so great. You said DEXA scans measure density, not strength. And
Mhm.
I feel like we get confused or we don't realize there's a difference. And so if somebody's density measures a certain way, that doesn't really correlate exactly with bone strength. And so is
Right.
that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So I
Yes,
just thought that,
absolutely. The strength is made up of, all the different minerals. I mean, it's not just the one mineral that everybody's concerned about, calcium. And there's a lot of framework to bone cells and to bone itself. And the density is just one aspect.
yeah. And I think I've seen or maybe had a wrist scan. I've never heard of heel and finger. What would that provide?
Mhm.
And why would someone have that versus the full spine and hip pelvis
Yeah,
area?
my only thought would be if maybe they had an ankle fracture that didn't make
Oh,
sense, or sometimes people have fractures that they don't know why they or how they got it. Like somebody who's got chronic foot pain and they go to the doctor and they x-ray and it's like, oh, you've got a fracture in, one of the bones. And they're like, well, I didn't hit anything. I didn't hurt. Why is that and so that might be why. Um, yeah, yeah.
that's interesting. And you mentioned parathyroid. Not to go off on a thing, but when my son, and I do want to talk about this for a second because I want to lead it into men for a second. But when my son was around 8 or 10 years, I think he was 8 years old, that very thing happened where he had pain in his foot. And we went and had an x-ray, and the doctor said, no, it's fine. It's in his head. Take him to a therapist. And he kept saying, Mom, something's not right. Eventually, that doctor humored us and had him do an MRI, and there were 6 fractures in the one foot, and we didn't know why. And they ended up saying that it was a parathyroid issue, and later we found out it wasn't. But, it's interesting to hear about how that correlates with bone and fractures. And, men, you had one percentage in there, but overall, is osteoporosis or bone health a concern for men versus we really focus on women?
Right. So, well, I'm thinking, the powers that be have realized they've missed half the population. So I'm sure they're going to target them at some point, but they've got to find some advantage point to access, and they haven't found one yet. So it doesn't appear to be a huge issue in the male population, but that could change depending on media and yeah.
Okay.
I'll leave it at
So
that. But the parathyroid thing, the sclerostin inhibitors are some of the latest class of drugs, and that they're influencing that hormone. When we start messing with the natural function of the human body, we just end up with results that we're not expecting and we don't want. And I go into some pretty deep detail of those meds in that course with Sid, and it was really disheartening to see how much they play with the math. There's something called relative risk reduction and absolute risk reduction. Absolute risk reduction is math. It's 2 minus 1 is 1. But relative risk reduction says, oh, you just reduced that risk by 50% because 1 is half of 2, instead of reducing it by 1%. So it's the math, the way the math is played with those medications is it's very disheartening. Yes. I mean, even, you mentioned Fosamax, that reduces the risk of a fracture by less than 3%, but they'll tell you that it's 40 something percent or 60 something. I forget the detail now. I have it on a slide, based on relative risk reduction. So when you see the word relative, they've played with the numbers to make it look more effective than it is.
Interesting. All those good tips to know. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. If you do, or comments, please go ahead and share in the chat. I just want to ask a couple more questions if you're okay, still on time for a few minutes. Okay, so the best way to check one's gut health or microbiome, because you did talk about that and it is important for absorption and different things. If somebody was just like, well, I have no idea, what would you say is a good way to kind of see where you're at?
Well, there's some really like low-hanging fruit, obvious things. If you've got a healthy gut, you're going to have very healthy bowel movements. I mean, you can actually go onto the internet and you can search healthy stool and it will show you pictures. So if your bowel is working properly, you're going to have a really healthy stool. You're going to have, and I'm going to get a little bit graphic, what my daughter used to call a ghost poop, because it's so clean. The toilet paper doesn't even show anything. So there's some really healthy movements, and ideally you're having at least 1 a day, if not 2 a day, depending on how much food you're consuming. And so that's huge right there. Are you someone who's had a long history of antibiotic use, birth control pill use, or certain medications? Those will definitely cause some issues with the good guys. I call them the beneficial bacteria. And you will almost always have, well, I shouldn't say almost, you will always have some pathogenic bacteria in the body, but the good guy's job is to push the bad guys in the corner and make them behave. And so if you've taken an antibiotic, you've killed off all the good guys, and now the bad guys can kind of overrun because there aren't enough good guys to keep them behaving. Now, yes, the antibiotic kills off the bad guys too, but because you don't have more good than bad at the end, the bad can overrun. And that's where people end up with diarrhea or constipation. They continuously get one infection after another, that kind of thing. So there is some low-hanging fruit. And gas, bloating, that can happen if you're consuming a lot of legumes. But typically you'll know if your gut's performing properly.
And
Yes.
if somebody is not having a great performance, is there anything that's just, obviously you want to check with your doctor, but is there anything that they could, look at besides like maybe their diet is, whole food plant-based, or, I mean, because it varies for people. And of course, everybody's individual, but just overall general, is there anything that someone could say, okay, I'm going to try, this before I go to the doctor? Or is it just better to check with your doctor?
Right. So, well, as long as you're not having any serious symptoms, then, it's not harmful to try a couple things. One of the most beneficial would be a probiotic regimen. The problem with probiotics is that there's a lot of products on the shelf that are absolutely useless. There's something called a CFU, a colony forming unit, and you need to replenish a healthy supply of good guys. You need a really large amount of CFUs. And you'll see products that'll say 7 billion CFU, which sounds like a lot, but that's not even a drop in the bucket. And the probiotics can have something called a prebiotic, which is like a pre-digested sugar. So it's like fructooligosaccharides, like FOS or something. And if you are really low on good guys and you take one that has a prebiotic, it can make you more uncomfortable. It can make you more gassy, more bloated, and you're not really happy you're taking that product. So you're better off to start with one that doesn't have a prebiotic first, but a fairly good amount, at least 25 billion. And then you can ramp up and you can go through. I mean, usually when I consult with people, I recommend stages. And within 6 months, you can really restore a healthy, what's called eubiosis, which is a healthy amount of good guys. And it's the good thing about probiotics is there's never been an adverse event reported from its use. You can use it from birth till right before you go below ground. There's never been an adverse event reported. So the worst they'll do is make you more gassy or bloated if you're using the wrong formula for you.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a great wealth of
Oh, and
information.
one other tip that you'll
Yeah.
never see on the bottle, you need to take it with food. Because if you
Oh,
take it on an empty stomach, the stomach acids will kill it off and it won't get where it needs to go. And I rarely see that on a bottle where it says take with food. You
oh,
definitely want to take it with food.
okay. All right. So that's really great. Um, and let's see. The last thing I just want to just say. Well, there's two things if we have time. I wanted to know, the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts. I love, just to reference for a minute, how to remember, right? The
Mhm.
cleaning up versus building. And I
Yes.
loved how you taught about that. I thought that was really great. It's very good to understand how the bone, rebuilds and grows and continues, because when you do take some of these medications that sometimes are recommended, it can, stop, like you said, the cleanup, and then you're just building on top of like an unstable bone that has,
Well,
the
you
divot.
don't tend to build.
Oh,
Because
you
if the
don't
if
even
the
tend to
black
build.
yeah, because if the class haven't created those little divots from cleaning up, then the builder doesn't come in to build. So
Mm,
they've actually seen bone toughness decline by up to 20% by using bisphosphonates, which are Fosamax and all the others.
yes.
So
Wow. So
because you're
you really,
interrupting the natural phase of bone remodeling.
yeah, and so you really need to understand the side effects and what exactly it does. Go
Mhm.
in and do your research if that's something you're considering. I really think that that's important. So the last thing is the vibrating platforms. There was a time when I went to a physical therapy office specializing in osteoporosis. And one of the things they had me do was stand on a vibrating plate, and they were selling them. And, so it was interesting to hear that. And they were saying, like, if you stand on this plate, which kind of looked like a scale, the one that I was on, and it kind of vibrates you, and that's supposed to stimulate bone, right? But what you were saying is that, that we don't know. We don't have the, you know, we don't
Right.
have.
And data does show that it can make the muscles stronger and it can reduce the risk of falls because of balance issues. So it is a positive. But there, I haven't seen any studies. I could have missed them. If anybody finds one, please let me know. I haven't seen any studies that definitively states that it actually increases bone mineral density.
Yeah, and so that's really important to work on balance. And so,
Mhm.
okay, so if I was going to use one of those, which I don't own one at this time, but oh, balance, right? And you could do balance with so many things, just even standing, like you said, with your eyes closed, making sure that something can catch you if you're unstable, and maybe lifting one foot up or playing around with that. I think working
Right.
on balance is really important so that
Yeah.
you can prevent falling.
Mhm. Yes. And I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about balance because it's
Ooh.
not just about standing on one foot, because balance is really it's fluidity with control, because nobody ever fell down when they were just standing still. They lose their balance when they're moving. And so the body has to be trained to move with control. It's a very different thing. I actually do a balance class at the local college. It's
Oh,
yeah, it's the human body is so much fun to work with. I mean, it responds really well when you do the right things the right way.
well, I'm going to have to check out more of your videos. I've watched a lot and I've done some of your classes, and I'm excited about that October 1st through 3rd Aging Young program that you're offering for free. I'm going to go ahead and sign up for it. And anyone watching a replay or live, I urge you to check out Eileen's free information. And this one is no exception. The ones that I've enjoyed in the past, you share so much information and you also answer questions, which is great. And I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and for all of you who tuned in to watch today. And I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for our regular Tuesday Live, where I'm going to share about my latest travel recap. I've been missing in action for a few weeks, so I'm excited to be back, and I'm certainly excited that I was able to share with you today. Any last tips, tricks, comments?
Probably the most important thing that I want people to remember is that we have been fed the narrative that we are going to decline as we get older, and it's not true. We have to reject that narrative because it is not true. There are way too many people in their 80s and 90s doing amazing things, and they're ordinary people doing it. So, yeah, we don't have to end up in a nursing home or lose our independence or even end up with disposable underwear. It's not required as a rite of
Amen.
passage.
That is awesome. Yes. We can do anything. We just have to get up off that couch and do it. Stay active, eat your greens. Don't forget to eat your greens. And I always say give plants a chance, because they will definitely help you. Thank you so much, Eileen. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. And this will be a replay in the future. Okay. Bye for now.